This is Nightline.
Tonight, breaking news. A passenger jet and a military helicopter collide near D.C.'s Reagan National Airport. 64 people aboard the American Airlines plane, 3 soldiers on the Black Hawk helicopter. The collision captured by the Earth Cam at the Kennedy Center. Now the dramatic first images of the wreckage. The chilling audio.
Did you see that? I think you saw that. Affirmative.
The massive search and rescue effort in the frigid Potomac River happening right now. What we're learning tonight. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. As we come on the air tonight, a massive search and rescue operation is underway in Washington, D.C. in the frigid waters of the Potomac River. Just hours ago, a commuter jet and an Army Black Hawk helicopter on a training flight collided in midair. At least 64 people were aboard the plane, and 3 soldiers were on board the helicopter. Several bodies have been pulled from the water, and so far, no survivors have been rescued. Joining me now is ABC's Alex Brachet in Washington, D.C. Alex, what can you tell us?
Hey, Byron. So first, let me orient you a little bit. We are on the departures ramp in between Terminal 1 and Terminal 2, and you can see this massive scene behind me, that sea of red lights from all those first responder vehicles. And then up there in the distance, that is a search helicopter. It has been doing laps, performing a grid search here, trying to look for any possible survivors of this crash. And that's because time is of the essence, Byron. Right now, as we're getting further and further into the night, the temperature has dipped. Now below 40 degrees, about 38 last checked. And so for any potential survivors that are in the Potomac behind me, time is of the essence. And because of that, we have seen a massive response. I'm talking about dozens of fire trucks, dozens of cop cars from different municipalities and different agencies, and also those search and rescue boats and dive teams now all making their way over there, trying to find any other possible survivors.
Thank you, Alex. I'm joined now by ABC News contributor and aviation consultant Steve Gagnon. Steve, thank you for joining us tonight. You're a former military pilot. How does something like this happen at one of the busiest airports in the country?
Yeah, Byron, whenever the NTSB does investigations into mishaps like this, they gather lots and lots of evidence. They aren't ready to say what caused this. But these days, there's so much data that we get immediately that we can begin to draw some immediate conclusions. So we do know, because we have the tower tapes, that there was an Army helicopter that was flying south down the Potomac as this regional jet was landing at just on runway 33, which means it was just heading towards the northwest. So if you've been to D.C., sort of pointing at the Kennedy Center. And so the helicopter is allowed to fly along the Potomac as long as it stays at 200 feet. The tower said to the helicopter, "Do you see the regional jet in front of you?" The helicopter acknowledged, "We see it, and we will avoid it." Now, what I think may have happened is that helicopter crew misidentified the regional jet that they eventually hit. They may have seen another helicopter. At night, you have lots of lights out there, the city of Alexandria, the city of Washington, and so they may have gotten drawn off on what was not their traffic. And they thought that they were clear, but unfortunately they weren't, and the midair collision occurred.
We're talking about a commercial jetliner and a military Black Hawk helicopter. Why, again, would a military aircraft, especially a military chopper, be so close to a commercial jetliner?
The helicopters are flying up and down the Potomac all day long and all night long because of all of the things that go on in Washington, D.C. that require helicopters, particularly in an emergency situation. So in this case, everybody seems to have done everything right. The helicopter was where it was supposed to be, below 200 feet. They were talking to the tower. The tower said, "Do you see this?" The regional jet was on what we call short final, so maybe under 200 feet. The crew in the regional jet are looking at the runway, and they're thinking about finding where their touchdown point is. The helicopter is crossing right to left. It's in their peripheral vision, and they just don't see it. And it wouldn't set off any alarm in the regional jet, not necessarily. But everybody was talking to everybody, and everybody should have been where they were. And so the problem here is that it seemed to be a misidentification by the helicopter crew when they thought they had the regional jet, but they probably saw some other aircraft, and they were thinking that they were okay when they really weren't.
We're in the early hours of this case. There's a recovery rescue mission going on right now. People are risking their lives in hopes of saving lives, survivors. We don't know about that at this point. But walk us through what the investigation likely looks like right now. What are people looking to do? What are the priorities right now?
Right now, Byron, it's try to find somebody who may still be alive in the river. Airports that are next to water have crash fire rescue both for on the land and in the water. So San Francisco, LaGuardia, at Reagan. So they had crash boats out there, crash fire rescue boats out there immediately. They had divers ready to jump in the water. So right now, everything focuses on doing the best to find anybody that might still be alive. Once that is no longer the task, then it becomes the task of the NTSB to figure out why did this happen.
Steve, a final question, if I may. We understand it was a moonless night in D.C., as dark as it could be. So what the pilots have been relying on what they could see around them, what they've been relying primarily on their instruments?
It would have been visual, because it's a nice night here in Washington, D.C., Byron, and they probably were on night vision goggles. Now, I can tell you, having been able to spend time on night vision goggles over water, it is really uncomfortable. You think helicopters, when you see them fly down the Potomac before, they're, at 100 feet or less. They like to fly low. It's fun to fly low in a helicopter. But in this case, when you're flying over water at night, you can't tell the sky from the water. It's vertigo-inducing, and it's very uncomfortable. So I would imagine that they were stepped up at that 200-foot level just because it was more comfortable, and they could look outside and look at the horizon more and try to avoid any kind of a spatial disorientation. So that's probably why they were at an altitude where the regional jet was coming in and on short final. So lots of things went wrong. It was 4 or 5 things that could have been broken. This chain of events could have been broken at any point, and tragically, it wasn't.
Thank you, Steve. Earlier tonight, American Airlines CEO Robert Isom making a statement.
We are actively working with local, state, and federal authorities on emergency response efforts, and the American Airlines care team has been activated to assist our passengers and their families. We're cooperating fully with the National Transportation Safety Board in its investigation and will continue to provide all the information we can. Our cooperation is without pause, and we want to learn everything we can about today's events. That work will take time, but anything we can do now, we're doing.
This crash is a terrible disaster and the first major commercial jet crash in the U.S. in more than 15 years. Tonight, tragedy at Washington's D.C. Reagan's National Airport. American Eagle Flight 5342 from Wichita, Kansas, coming in for landing, colliding with the U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter. This live stream from the Kennedy Center's EarthCam webcam showing the explosion in the air. The plane carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew. The Black Hawk confirmed to have 3 Army soldiers on board. Tonight, the U.S. figure skating team confirming that several members were on board.
Did you see that? I think you saw that. Affirmative. Delta 832, sorry. I don't know if you caught earlier what happened, but there was a collision on the approach in the 3-3. We're going to be shutting down operations for the indefinite future. If you want to go back to the gate, highly suggest you guys coordinate with the company. Let me know what you want to do.
All right, we'll let the company talk to them right now. Yeah, we witnessed the whole thing.
Authorities addressing the incident at a late-night press conference.
At 8:48, an alert was sounded, initiating a large regional response. At 8:58, the first units arrived on the scene and found an aircraft in the water and began rescue operations.
Emergency crews rushing to the scene, divers in the Potomac searching for any survivors.
They are working diligently in very dark and cold conditions, cold water, to execute this rescue operation.
So it's a highly complex operation. The conditions out there are extremely rough. They're dealing with relatively windy conditions. Wind is hard out on the river.
Haunting images emerging tonight showing the debris as rescue crews search for survivors. Ari Schulman lives close to Reagan Airport in Alexandria, Virginia.
So I just saw the plane and I knew something was wrong because it was very, very close to the ground. It was maybe 80 or 100 feet above the ground, banked all the way to the right. I saw that for all of, this was maybe 2 seconds that I was looking at it. I looked back at the road, I looked back again, and it was gone. I didn't see any crash into the ground. I didn't see a fireball or an explosion or flames.
Another eyewitness recounting what they saw.
But when we went to the roof, it was insanity. Police trucks, ambulances, command vehicles.
Reagan National Airport was immediately shut down with no flights coming or going. An Army official confirming the Army UH-60 helicopter originated out of Fort Belvoir, Virginia. The airport director in Wichita, Kansas, addressing the media.
I don't have the exact time of when this incident occurred, but we were notified fairly shortly thereafter. It just breaks our heart to hear something like this occur, and so it's devastating for everyone.
Kansas Senator Jerry Moran describing flying the very route the plane took himself many times.
I lobbied American Airlines to begin having a direct nonstop flight service to DCA. That flight has been in existence about a year. We're going to know people who are on this flight, know their family members, know somebody. So this is a very personal circumstance.
This is the first major commercial crash in the U.S. since the Colgan Air Buffalo crash in 2009. There have been other incidents like the Asiana runway crash in 2013 where 2 people died. The last fatality on a plane was the woman who was partially sucked out of a Southwest window in 2018. This has been the safest period for aviation in history. This crash will undoubtedly shake the industry. It's reminiscent of another tragic airline crash. January 1982, an Air Florida flight crashed into the Potomac River. 74 people on board were killed. 5 survived, rescued from the icy waters. The scope of tonight's collision still unfolding.
You know, when one person dies, it's a tragedy, but when many, many, many people die, it's an unbearable sorrow. It's a heartbreak beyond measure.
Joining me now is ABC Chief Global Affairs Correspondent Martha Raddatz on Dangerfield Island.
Byron, we are right on the banks of the Potomac River. The midair would have occurred just behind where we are. You can see all the rescue and recovery vehicles. They have been out there for hours. This is also exactly the approach that regional jet would have made along very calm waters, very dark waters tonight, approaching Washington, D.C. You could have seen, as I can now, the Washington Monument, the U.S. Capitol, a city full of lights. We've also heard helicopters all night and watched them circle this area looking for any possible survivors, any possible rescue. Sometimes there were 3 up there at a time, all had their lights on. It is a very grim night here on the banks of the Potomac. Byron?
Our thanks to Martha. Joining me now is Greater D.C. resident Jamie Lynn, who witnessed from her own home some of the frantic search and rescue efforts by first responders. Jamie Lynn, thank you so much for joining us. You live near Reagan Airport. What is it like there right now?
So right now it is still a very active scene. Still hearing just as much, if not more, noise from emergency response. Specifically now I've heard quite an uptick in the number of aircraft over the area. So just assuming that there's more helicopters assisting in those search and rescue efforts. Now I know you said you didn't hear or see the actual collision, but when did you realize something was wrong? It was a normal Wednesday, and I went to our local Arlington community Facebook group where our neighbors will often post news, and I saw that the most recent post was a crash, and I rubbed my eyes thinking, like, here? I look out my window because we have a direct line of sight to the airport. We're just a couple of 100 yards away, and you just see this intense cluster of emergency response, and that's when the feeling kind of hit that something really horrible had happened. Now, I understand it's a moonless night over D.C., so it's darker than dark there this evening. In your wildest imagination, could you have imagined in this post-9/11 world with so much focus on aviation security that this kind of thing would have happened in the nation's capital? That's what I, have been saying to my family and friends, is that when you live here in Washington, D.C. and the immediate surrounding cities, you kind of feel immune to being someone that this could happen to or see this happen. We have one of the most regulated and looked after air zones in the world. We have all eyes on the ground and in the air 24/7. And so to just kind of feel like that cloak of safety has been ripped away, you literally cannot fathom something like this happening here.
Jamie Lynn, you live near Reagan National Airport. We're grateful for you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
When we come back, how could such a dramatic crash happen in one of the most secure airspaces in the world? Welcome back. We've been following the developing story of the plane crash happening right in our nation's capital. The crash horrible and tragic, but also shocking because it happened in one of America's most secure airspaces. I'm joined now by ABC's Sam Sweeney, who covers transportation for us. Thanks so much for joining us. First question. In this post-9/11 world, many of us consider Reagan National to be one of the safest airports in the country, if not the world. How could this kind of thing happen this evening?
And that's going to be the focus for this investigation. You have to be specially certified to fly into Reagan National Airport. The approaches are extremely difficult, and we now know that these aircraft were given warnings that they were near each other. So they have to figure out, they saw each other, they had the warnings. Why did they collide?
Walk us through, is it normal for a military helicopter to be in that close proximity to a commercial airline?
This is Washington, D.C. We are, surrounded by military aircraft. We are, just less than a mile from the Pentagon at Reagan National Airport. These military aircraft are going in and out of the Pentagon all day. You have Coast Guard helicopters that are based at Reagan National Airport, and they are, bringing VIPs all over the National Capital Region. You don't see many private aircraft in the DCA airport airspace because it is the most restricted airspace in the entire country. And this is at a heavily congested airport. Reagan National has the busiest runway in the country. There are planes one after another. These are highly trained air traffic controllers that handle this congested airspace. This is going to reverberate throughout the industry. We have been in the safest period in aviation history in the United States ever. And now that ended tonight.
Sam Sweeney from our bureau in Washington. Sam, thank you so very much. We know this will be a long night for you and our colleagues there. Thank you.
Thank you.
When we come back, the latest on the crash outside Washington, what we've learned. And finally tonight, a recap of what we know as we take a live look at the crash site. Just hours ago, a commuter jet flying from Wichita, Kansas, colliding with an Army Black Hawk helicopter over the Potomac River near Reagan National Airport outside Washington, D.C. 64 passengers and crew were aboard the plane, which was operated by American Airlines. 3 soldiers were on board the helicopter. First responders from across the region raced to the scene to help. A massive search and rescue operation now underway for hours. There are multiple casualties. Stay with ABC News. We'll have much more on this plane crash throughout the night and on GMA in the morning. That's Nightline for this evening. For the good men and women at the crash site and the families involved, Godspeed. Good night.